At my wedding, a stranger shouted "Stop," then revealed my groom's secret. If you're listening to this right now, I need you to stay with me. Don't skip ahead. Don't put this down and tell yourself you'll come back to it. Stay right here with me. Because what happened on my wedding day didn't just ruin the ceremony. It didn't just embarrass me in front of every person I loved. It exposed a truth so deep, so carefully constructed, so deliberately hidden, that even now, when I think about it in the quiet of an ordinary evening, I still feel the ground shift beneath me. I still ask myself how I didn't see it. I still sit with that question the way you sit with something that has no clean answer, turning it over, looking at it from different angles, never quite satisfied with what you find. And before I go any further, tell me in the comments where you're watching from. I want to know how far this story travels, because stories like this one have a way of finding the people who need them. And if this found you today, I don't think that's an accident. I want to start before the wedding, before the dress and the flowers and the music and the moment everything fell apart. Because the thing about betrayal is that it never starts on the day you discover it. It starts long before. It starts in all the small moments you looked at someone and chose to believe what they showed you instead of listening to the quiet thing inside you that wasn't quite sure. And I want to take you back to the beginning, because you need to understand who I was before Daniel, to understand what he took from me and what it meant when I finally took it back. I was not someone who trusted easily. That is important. I want you to know that about me from the start, because the people who will hear this story and think I was naive, that I should have known, that the signs were there, they are not entirely wrong, but they are missing something. They are missing the part of the story that explains why a person who does not trust easily can still be deceived completely. And that part of the story starts years before Daniel ever walked into my life. I had loved before him, once, seriously, the kind of love that reorganizes everything around itself and makes you believe the world is a different place than it was before. His name doesn't matter now. What matters is that it ended badly, not dramatically, not with a stranger at a wedding, just quietly and completely, the way some things end, with a slow withdrawal of warmth until one day you realize the room has been cold for a long time and you had just been telling yourself it was fine. After that, I pulled back. Not from life. I kept working, kept seeing friends, kept moving forward the way you do, because forward is the only direction available. But I pulled back from the particular kind of openness that love requires. I built something around myself. Not a wall exactly, more like a careful distance, a habit of watching before deciding, a practice of not letting people too far in until they had proved, repeatedly and over time, that they deserved to be there. So when I tell you that Daniel got through that, I need you to understand what that means. It means he was patient. It means he was consistent. It means he showed up the same way on the 100th day as he had on the first, and that is not nothing. That is actually very difficult to fake over the course of 2 years, which is part of why I believed it was real, because real is what it felt like. Every morning text that wasn't trying too hard. Every evening he listened without trying to fix anything. Every small, ordinary moment of being known and not judged for it. That is what 2 years of Daniel felt like. That is what I thought I was marrying. His full name was Daniel Aw. I met him at a mutual friend's birthday dinner, one of those gatherings where you don't know half the room and you spend the first hour wishing you had stayed home, and then something shifts and you stop wishing that. He was sitting across the table from me, and he wasn't performing the way people sometimes perform at those dinners. He wasn't being louder than necessary, or funnier than the moment called for, or more interesting than he actually was. He was just present, listening more than he spoke, asking questions that showed he had actually heard the answers to the previous ones. I noticed him the way you notice something that doesn't demand to be noticed, gradually and then completely. We talked for a long time that night, after the dinner had dispersed and people had moved into smaller conversations and the restaurant had grown quieter around us. And when I got home, I thought about him in a way I had not thought about anyone in a long time. Not with urgency, just with the kind of quiet interest that felt safe precisely because it wasn't overwhelming. He asked for my number before I left, waited 3 days before using it. When he called, it was not to impress me, it was just to talk. And we did, for a long time, about nothing important and everything important the way you do when you are discovering someone, and the discovering itself is the pleasure. He asked me to dinner the following week. I said yes. We had dinner, then dinner again. Then a walk along the river on a Sunday afternoon when the light was low and golden and everything felt unhurried. We fell into each other slowly, the way I had always wanted to fall into something, without the vertigo of speed, without the anxiety of not knowing where the ground was. He made me feel safe. That is the truest thing I can say about him. Before I knew anything else was true or false, that part was true. He made me feel safe. And for someone who had spent years keeping a careful distance, that feeling was everything. 18 months in, he proposed. We were at home, not at a restaurant, not at some staged public moment designed for photographs, just at home on an ordinary evening, and he got down on one knee in the kitchen while something was cooking on the stove, and he looked at me in that way he had, steady and certain, and he said he wanted to spend his life with me. I said yes. I said yes without hesitation, which itself was remarkable because I had spent so many years hesitating. I said yes, and I meant it with everything I had. And the 6 months between that evening and the wedding were the most genuinely happy months I could remember. Planning something together, building something together, looking at a future and believing in it. The wedding was set for a Saturday in late spring, an outdoor garden because I had always wanted to be married somewhere with sky above me and growing things around me, somewhere that felt alive. We chose white flowers, simple and abundant, the kind that look effortless but took a great deal of planning to achieve. Soft music, a live quartet that played while guests arrived and took their seats. Everything chosen carefully, everything considered, everything placed exactly where it was meant to be. My mother helped with most of it. My best friend Sarah was my maid of honor, and she threw herself into every detail with a love that still makes me emotional when I think about it. These were my people. This was my life. This was the day I had quietly believed in for years. The day I had almost stopped believing in after the last relationship ended. The day that was finally, actually happening. I remember waking up that morning before my alarm, lying in the quiet of the morning for a moment, just listening to the birds outside and the distant sound of the city beginning its day and thinking, this is it. This is the day. I had stayed the night before at my mother's house, a tradition she had insisted on, something about the groom not seeing the bride before the ceremony. At the time, I had thought it was slightly old-fashioned, but agreed because it made her happy. Now I think about that detail sometimes. I think about the fact that I slept in my childhood bedroom the night before my wedding, surrounded by the faint, familiar smell of home, and I had no idea. I lay in that bed and thought about Daniel and felt nothing but warmth and certainty, and I had no idea. The morning was full. Hair and makeup, my friends coming in and out of the room, bringing food I was too nervous to eat, telling me I looked beautiful, filling the space with the particular energized tenderness of women supporting someone they love through a significant moment. My mother sat beside me at one point while the makeup artist worked, and she held my hand and didn't say anything, just held it. And I felt so loved in that moment, so surrounded and supported and certain that I almost cried and had to stop myself because of the mascara. I stood in front of the mirror and the dress and I looked at myself for a long time. I barely recognized myself. Not because I didn't look beautiful. I did look beautiful, but because of the expression on my face. That particular kind of open, unguarded hopefulness that you only wear when you have fully allowed yourself to believe something. I had not worn that expression in years. I looked at it in the mirror and I thought, this is what it looks like to have decided to trust again, to have chosen someone and let yourself be certain about them. This is what it looks like to be happy. And underneath it, quiet, barely there, something I couldn't name. Not fear exactly, not doubt, more like a very faint hum of something that hadn't been invited. I noticed it the way you notice a sound that stops when you try to listen for it. It was there, and then it wasn't. I dismissed it, because everything was perfect, and I had worked hard to believe in perfect things again, and I was not going to let an unnamed feeling take that from me on the morning of my wedding. The garden was more beautiful than I had imagined it would be. I saw it briefly before the ceremony began, before I was taken around to the entrance to wait for my cue, and it took my breath. The flowers were exactly right. The chairs were filled with people I loved. The light was doing that particular thing that spring afternoon light does when it comes through leaves and lands in patches on the ground. The quartet was playing something gentle and unhurried. Everything that had existed in my imagination for months was now real and present and waiting. I stood at the entrance with my father on one side and Sarah on the other, and I felt something so full and complete that it almost frightened me, the way very good things sometimes do when you are aware of how much you want them and therefore how much there is to lose. The music changed, my cue. I took a long breath. My father squeezed my arm gently, and I began walking down the aisle. Every step felt weighted. Not with dread, with significance, with the awareness that this was a moment I would carry with me for the rest of my life. The guests had risen, faces turned toward me, smiling, some already emotional. I saw my aunt pressing a handkerchief to her eyes. I saw my childhood friend grinning so wide it looked like it hurt. I saw my mother standing in the front row with her hands clasped in front of her, and her face carrying an expression I will never forget. Pride and love and something almost like relief, like she had been waiting for this day for me the same way I had been waiting for it for myself. And at the end of the aisle at the altar, I saw Daniel, standing still, perfectly still, in a suit that fit him exactly right, that deep navy that I had been with him when he chose and had told him made him look extraordinary. He was watching me walk toward him, and he was smiling. That smile. Calm and certain and warm, the smile I had fallen in love with in a restaurant over a dinner that ran longer than anyone expected. I walked toward it. I let everything I felt in that moment be completely real. I gave it all to that walk down that aisle. And when I reached him and he took my hands and looked at me, I was entirely there, entirely present, entirely his. "They're cold," he said softly, feeling my hands in his. "I'm nervous," I whispered back. He smiled. "Don't be. I'm here." Those words. I don't know if I can explain what those words meant to someone who had spent years learning not to need anyone to be there. Someone who had trained herself to be her own stability, her own anchor, because depending on someone else had cost her too much the last time. Don't be nervous. I'm here. 4 words, and I believed them completely. The officiant began. The words of the ceremony, love and commitment and the seriousness of the promise being made. I was not fully listening, not because it wasn't important, but because I was inside the feeling of it, and the words were just the surface of something much deeper. I was thinking about the years it had taken me to get to this moment, about all the times I had almost decided this was not something that was going to happen for me, about what it meant that it was happening now, here, with this man, in this light, surrounded by these people. I was thinking about how far I had come. I was feeling grateful in the way that surprises you when it arrives, fully and without warning, like something that had been building quietly and finally had somewhere to go. And then came the moment. The question that exists in ceremonies like this one for reasons that are mostly historical, that in ordinary life almost never produces anything but a brief silence before the ceremony continues. If anyone here has any reason why these two should not be joined in marriage, speak now or forever hold your peace. I heard it, I registered it, and I felt, for just a moment, the very last trace of that unnamed feeling I had dismissed that morning. It moved through me once and then was gone. I smiled slightly. Of course no one would say anything. This was real life.
Real life does not have dramatic interruptions at weddings. That is something that happens in films and in stories, not in a garden on a spring afternoon surrounded by people who loved us. Right?
The voice cut through the air so sharply that I felt it before I processed it, like a physical thing, like something had been dropped from a great height and landed in the middle of everything we had built that day. My heart dropped instantly and completely. The crowd gasped, a collective intake of breath that swept across the garden like a wave. I turned slowly, because some part of me didn't want to turn. Some part of me wanted to believe, for one more second, that it hadn't happened, that the sound was something else, a bird, a car backfiring, anything other than what it was. But I turned. Everyone turned. At the back of the aisle stood a man, a stranger. I had never seen him before in my life. He looked out of place in the way that someone looks when they have arrived somewhere urgently, without the preparation or the composure that a formal occasion demands. His shirt was slightly untucked on one side. His hair was not quite right. He was breathing in the careful way that people breathe when they have been running and are trying to hide it. He stood there and he looked at me, not at Daniel, at me. And his expression was the most complicated thing I had ever seen on a stranger's face. Determination, guilt, something that might have been grief. "This wedding cannot continue," he said. His voice was steady despite his obvious haste, firm and quiet and completely certain. The murmurs spread through the crowd immediately. I could feel the energy of the garden changing the way weather changes, quickly and unmistakably. People shifting in their seats, phones appearing in hands. The quartet had stopped playing, and the silence where music had been felt enormous. I felt Daniel's grip on my hands tighten, not the gentle tightening of someone who is steadying another person, the different kind, the kind that has tension in it. I looked at him quickly. His jaw was set. His expression had changed in a way I couldn't fully read but felt. "Who is that?" I whispered. He didn't answer. He was looking at the stranger at the back of the aisle with an expression I had never seen on his face before. I had spent 2 years studying his face. I knew it in every mood, in every light, in every version of itself that he had ever shown me. This version I did not know, and the not knowing was the first real crack. The stranger walked forward, slowly, each step deliberate and unhurried in a way that seemed almost unnatural given what was happening, given the hundreds of eyes following him, given the enormity of what he had just interrupted. He walked as if he had decided something, and the deciding had settled him. Every person in that garden watched him come. "You need to hear the truth," he said, looking directly at me, not at the crowd, not at Daniel, at me, like we were the only two people there. My chest tightened so sharply that I had to remind myself to breathe. "What truth?" I asked, and my voice came out steadier than I expected, which surprised me then and surprises me still when I think about it. He stopped a few feet from the altar, close enough that I could see the detail of his face. He was older than he had seemed from the back of the aisle, late 40s maybe, the kind of face that had lived a great deal. He looked at me with something that was almost apology before he had said anything that required an apology. And then he turned to Daniel, and I saw it. For the first and only time in 2 years of knowing Daniel, I saw something real cross his face that he had not chosen to put there. Fear, not social discomfort, not embarrassment, not the mild anxiety of someone caught in an awkward moment. Fear. The precise, unmistakable fear of someone who knows that what is coming cannot be stopped. It was there for only a second. Then his face rearranged itself into something controlled. But I saw it. And once you have seen something like that in someone's face, you cannot unsee it. It changes the landscape of everything around it. "Tell her," the stranger said, quiet, cold. The 2 words of someone who has already said everything many times in private and has run out of patience with private. Daniel's jaw tightened. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said immediately, too quickly, the smoothness of it too practiced, like a sentence that had been waiting, ready. The stranger made a short sound that wasn't quite a laugh. "Of course you don't," he said. "You've been lying so long it probably feels like the truth now." The garden was completely transformed. Whatever it had been before, the careful beauty of it, the warmth and the flowers and the music and the love, all of it had been overlaid with something else now, something that could not be undone. I could feel the shift in the people around me, the collective holding of breath, the particular charged attention of a group of people witnessing something they did not expect and cannot look away from. I was aware of all of it from a distance, because most of me was somewhere else entirely, trying to understand what was happening, trying to locate myself inside it, trying to hold on to something stable. "Enough," Daniel said, and his voice had an edge I had heard before, rarely, the edge of someone who has reached the limit of their patience. "Security," he began. "There is no security," the stranger said evenly. I made sure of that. Something about the calm of that sentence was more frightening than anything else he had said, the preparation it implied, the deliberateness of it. "Can someone please tell me what is happening?" I asked, and this time my voice shook because I was no longer able to make it do otherwise. The stranger looked at me again, and his expression shifted. The coldness he had directed at Daniel fell away, and what replaced it was something gentler, something that looked like genuine sorrow. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "I'm so sorry to do this here, today, like this, but you deserve to know before this goes any further." My stomach dropped all the way to the ground. "Know what?" I asked. He reached into his jacket slowly. The garden was completely silent. Every person there was holding themselves still in the way people do when they know something irreversible is about to happen. He pulled out a folder, aged at the edges, like it had been carried carefully for a while. He opened it, removed a small stack of documents, held them in his hands for a moment, then looked at me directly. "Your groom," he said, measuring every word, "is already married." The world stopped. That is the only way I know to describe it. Not slowed, stopped. Like someone had reached into the mechanism of things and simply halted it. I could not hear anything, could not feel the ground under my feet, could not feel the weight of the dress or the warmth of the afternoon or the presence of anyone around me. There was only the sentence, "Already married." Already married. The words sat in the air in front of me like something solid that I could not get around. "That's not true," Daniel said immediately, but his voice was not steady anymore. And I had 2 years of knowing his voice, of knowing every register of it, and this register was one I had never heard before. The stranger held up the documents. "Marriage certificate," he said. "Legally registered, 3 years ago. I have copies here for anyone who wishes to verify." 3 years. I heard that and something in my mind started to move against my will, because I did not want it to move. I did not want to do the mathematics, but it did it anyway. 3 years ago, and Daniel and I had been together for 2 years, which meant he had been married before we met, which meant every conversation about his past, every vague answer about previous relationships, every moment when I had felt the conversation deflect slightly and told myself it was just private, it was just the way some people are, it was nothing. It meant something entirely different than I had believed. I turned to Daniel slowly, the way you turn towards something you do not want to face but cannot avoid. "Is this true?" My voice came out very quiet. He did not answer. The silence of 2 seconds was the loudest thing I had ever heard. "Daniel." Still nothing, just his face arranged into the careful control that I now understood had always been performance. Just the slight movement of a muscle in his jaw that told me everything before he said a word. "Is this true?" I asked again, and this time I heard something in my own voice that I had not heard before, something that was past fear and past confusion and moving towards something else entirely. He finally looked at me, and in his eyes, underneath all the control, I saw confirmation before he spoke it. Tears filled my eyes immediately, not the tears of sadness, the tears of something more complicated, the tears of a world rearranging itself. "You lied to me?" The crack in my voice when I said that is something I still hear sometimes. "It's not what you think," he said. And I want to pause on those words, because those words, that precise arrangement of 5 words, is one of the cruelest things a person can say in a moment of discovered truth. It's not what you think, as if the problem is with your thinking, as if the issue is your perception rather than their action, as if the truth, clearly documented, clearly testified to by a stranger who had no reason to be there except that the truth had sent him, was somehow being misunderstood by you. Then what is it? I said. My voice was no longer shaking. Something had passed through the shaking and come out the other side. He ran his hand through his hair. That gesture, I had seen it 100 times. I had always thought it was endearing, the gesture of a thoughtful man working something out. Now I saw it differently. It's complicated, he said. No, I said, and my voice was steady now in a way that surprised even me. It's not complicated. It's very simple. Are you married or not? The garden was so quiet I could hear the birds in the trees above us still singing, indifferent to the complete dismantling of my life. He closed his eyes briefly, then opened them and said the word. Yes. 1 word, 3 letters, the sound of everything I had built in 2 years coming apart at once. The gasps from the crowd reached me as if from a great distance. I heard exclamations. I heard voices. I heard someone nearby begin to cry. All of it was far away. I was standing very close to myself and very far from the world at the same time. I was in the strange calm that sometimes arrives inside catastrophe, the eye of it, where everything is too big to fully feel yet, and so you exist for a moment in something that almost resembles stillness. Why? I asked. 1 word back to him, just that. Why? He stepped toward me. I did not step back yet. I was going to tell you, he said. When? I asked. And then something came through the stillness, something hot and clear and completely certain of itself. When were you going to tell me, Daniel? After the honeymoon? After the first anniversary? When? He had no answer. Because there was no answer, because there had never been a plan to tell me, because the plan had been, all along, to not tell me, to keep 2 lives separate, to keep a marriage hidden under another marriage like something buried that he hoped would never surface. And it would not have surfaced, I understood, in that moment, if not for the man standing a few feet away who had decided the burial was something he could not allow.
I turned to the stranger. I needed to understand who he was. Not out of curiosity, out of the need to place this moment inside a story that made some kind of sense. Who are you? I asked. He had been watching me with that expression of complicated sorrow the whole time. He hesitated for a moment before answering, then quietly, I'm her brother. The silence after those 2 words was different from all the previous silences, deeper, more complete. Her brother, I repeated. He nodded. She couldn't come today, he said. She didn't think she could hold herself together enough to face it, but she wanted someone to be here. She wanted someone to tell you before it was too late, so I came. I stood with that for a moment. I thought about a woman I had never met, a woman who was, legally, already married to the man whose hands I had been holding minutes ago. A woman who had learned that her husband was about to marry someone else, who had decided that the woman he was deceiving deserved to know, who had sent her brother to a stranger's wedding to stop it. And I thought about what it must have cost her to make that decision, to choose the truth over the dignity of staying away, to choose to blow everything up rather than let another woman walk into the same room she was trapped in. I'm sorry, the stranger said again. And I believed him completely. There was nothing performative in the apology. It was the genuine sorrow of someone who had done a necessary and painful thing, and knew it would land as pain regardless of the necessity. I nodded, slowly. Something was settling into me. Beneath the shock and the grief and the public enormity of it, something that felt almost like clarity. I looked at Daniel for the last time. I wanted to look at him properly, to see him without any of the 2 years of accumulated story I had laid over him. I tried to see just the facts of him, the man who had shown up consistently for 2 years, who had been patient and warm and steady, who had made me feel safe, who had been all of those things while being something else entirely, simultaneously, in a life I had known nothing about. I wanted to hate him cleanly. It would have been easier to hate him cleanly, but I couldn't quite manage it. What I felt was more complicated than hate and more devastating. It was grief. The specific grief of losing something that you have realized never quite existed in the form you believed it did. Grieving not just the person, but the version of the person you had trusted. Grieving the 2 years of real feeling you had inside a relationship that was built on a lie. Grieving the morning, the mirror, the hope on your own face. "You didn't just lie to me," I said quietly enough that the people at the back of the garden probably couldn't hear me, but quietly in the specific way of something that doesn't need volume. "You built the whole thing on a lie. Every conversation, every morning, every plan we made, every time I trusted you with something I don't give easily. You took all of it and you built it on a lie." He reached for my hand. I stepped back, not dramatically, just one small certain step away. "Don't," I said. He stopped. I reached down slowly. My hands were not quite steady, but they were close enough. I took the ring off my finger. The ring he had chosen. The ring he had placed there on a knee in a kitchen while something cooked on the stove. I held it for a moment. Then I placed it in his open palm. The same hand I had held all through the ceremony. The same hand I had trusted. The same hand that had been holding my hand while keeping everything from me. "This ends here," I said. The words came out with a finality that surprised me, like something that had been waiting inside me to be said and had only just found its moment. The garden was completely still, 100 people watching and no one making a sound. I was aware of them all without looking at them. I was aware of my mother in the front row, and I knew, without seeing her, that she was standing very straight, the way she stands when she is holding herself together for someone else. I was aware of Sarah just behind me, and I could feel her presence like warmth at my back. I was aware of the flowers and the light and the quartet that had put down their instruments and were watching along with everyone else. I took it all in for a second. The ruins of the perfect day, the garden that was still beautiful despite what had happened in it. And then I reached down and lifted the hem of my dress slightly, just enough to walk freely. I turned. I walked, not quickly, not running away, just walking with intention, away from the altar and through the aisle and past the faces of 100 people who did not speak, who let me pass in silence, who gave me the dignity of an exit that was entirely my own. I walked out of the garden and into the ordinary afternoon, and I kept walking until the sounds of the wedding were behind me, and I could breathe. The weeks after that were some of the hardest of my life. Not because I was alone. I was not alone. My mother and Sarah and my friends surrounded me with the particular fierce tenderness of people who love you and are angry on your behalf and express both by refusing to leave you alone with your own thoughts for too long. They brought food, they sat with me, they let me talk when I needed to talk and were quiet when I needed quiet. They did not say I told you so because none of them had told me so and because they are not that kind of people. What I had to do in those weeks was grieve, and I want to be honest about that, because I think sometimes when we tell stories like this one, we skip past the grief and get to the strength and the recovery and the lessons learned, and the skipping past the grief is a disservice to anyone who has been through something similar. The grief was real. I had loved Daniel. Not the Daniel who turned out to be real, the Daniel I had believed in, who had felt real for 2 years, who had reorganized something in me that I had thought was permanently closed. Losing him meant losing the person I thought he was, and losing the version of myself I had become in the space of believing in him. That grief deserved to be felt. I felt it. I did not rush it. I sat inside it and let it be as large as it was. But something else was also happening in those weeks, running alongside the grief. Quieter, but present. A kind of stock-taking. The particular clarity that arrives after a significant deception is exposed, when you go back through everything with new information and you see it differently.
I went back through 2 years in my memory. I looked for the moments I had dismissed, the conversation that deflected and I had let deflect, the weekend I called unexpectedly and he hadn't picked up, and the explanation he gave afterward that I had accepted without question. The fact that I had never met his family. He had said they were not close, and I had accepted that because some families are not close, and I did not want to be the person who pushed where they were not wanted. There were others, small things, individually nothing, together in retrospect something, and I had to sit with the fact that I had seen them and looked away. Not because I was foolish, but because I was trusting. Because I had made a decision to trust him, and trust means accepting the story someone offers you rather than investigating it. And he had known that. He had counted on it. I did eventually speak to her, his wife, his real wife. Not in person, by phone, once, several weeks after the wedding that wasn't. She called me. I almost didn't pick up, but I did. And we spoke for a long time. She told me things I had not known and some I had guessed. She told me their marriage had been struggling for years before he met me, that they had been essentially living apart, but that the marriage was never legally dissolved and there had been, she believed, no intention to dissolve it. She cried, I cried. We were two women who had been placed in opposition to each other by a man who had arranged things so that we would never know the other existed, and when we finally spoke, there was almost no opposition left. Just two people on either side of the same damage, trying to understand what had happened and how to carry it forward. I am not going to tell you we became friends. That would be too neat, and this story is not neat. But I will tell you that speaking to her helped me understand something important. That the deception had not been personal in the way betrayal sometimes feels personal. It had not been about me specifically. It had been about who he was and what he was willing to do to maintain the life he wanted, which was apparently a life in which inconvenient truths were managed rather than confronted. I had not created that in him. I had not caused it. I had simply, in the way of someone in the wrong place at the wrong time, encountered it. It took time, longer than I wanted and less time than I feared. I went back to work. I went back to my friends. I went back to the ordinary rhythm of days that keeps you moving, even when moving is the last thing you feel like doing. I was honest with the people around me about what had happened, not because I owed anyone the story, but because carrying it privately felt like another kind of hiding, and I had had enough of things being hidden. People were kind, mostly. There are always the ones who frame it as something that could have been avoided if you had just been more careful, more suspicious, more rigorous in your investigation of someone you are choosing to trust. I have learned to have patience for those people. They are usually speaking from fear. Their message, dressed as criticism, is actually a question they are asking themselves. If it happened to her, could it happen to me? And the answer is yes. The answer is that being a careful and thoughtful person who does not trust easily and who has good judgment about the world is not a guaranteed protection against a person who is committed over a long period to showing you only what they want you to see. The answer is that sometimes it happens to exactly the kind of person who was sure it wouldn't happen to them. And the answer is that surviving it, which you will, has nothing to do with whether you should have seen it coming, and everything to do with what you do after the garden and the morning after and all the ordinary days that follow.
I am not the same person I was standing in front of that mirror in the morning of that day. The woman in the mirror that morning was hopeful in the specific way of someone who has found the thing they were looking for. I am hopeful now in a different way. Not the hope of having found something. The hope of knowing that you can lose something enormous and grieve it properly, and get back up and continue to believe in the possibility of genuine love and real partnership. Not because you have proof that it exists in the form of another person, but because you have proof that you are the kind of person who is capable of it. That is yours. No one can take that from you. Someone can lie to you for 2 years. Someone can build something false and put you at the center of it. Someone can stand at an altar and hold your cold hands and look at you with everything you wanted to see and be hiding everything you needed to know. But they cannot make you into someone who is not capable of real love. They cannot reach into you and take that. It remains. It was always yours and it remains yours. So here we are. You have been with me through all of it, through the garden and the mirror and the quartet and the voice cutting through the air and the folder and the word yes and the ring placed in an open palm and all the weeks that followed. You stayed. And before you go, I need to ask you something. If you were standing at that altar, in that dress, in that moment, with 100 people watching and the truth arriving from a stranger at the back of the room, what would you have done? And after all of it, after all the grief and the clarity and the time that passes, would you have forgiven him? Not for his sake, not because he deserved it, but for your own. Because forgiveness, when it comes, is never really about the person who wronged you. It is about deciding that you will not carry what they did as a weight inside you for the rest of your life. It is about choosing your own freedom over the satisfaction of holding on to the anger. I want to know what you think. I want to know where you are watching from right now. What country, what city, what part of the world received this story today? Tell me in the comments. Be honest with me. I am reading every single one, and I will see you there.